Well, there was once a fellow who was eager to trust in the Spirit of God and anxious to turn to the Scriptures that he might find a special word from God for him that very day. And so in faith, he committed himself to opening the pages of his Bible and putting down his finger and seeing what word God had for him. And so he opened up his Bible and he put his finger down on, wouldn't you know it, Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verse 51, which says, "And he ran away naked." Well, surely not, he thought. I'm going to try this again. God has a message for me today. And he flipped just a few pages over and he came to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, verse 27. And he put his finger down and he read, "Go and do likewise." Well, the third time will be the charm, he thought. And he flipped his Bible over just a few more pages and he came to the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 27, which read, "Whatever you're going to do, do it quickly." There's an old and well-known saying, quite likely coined by a Canadian, in fact, Tom Carson, who was a Baptist minister in Quebec. "A text without a context is a pretext for a proof text." It's impossible to say exactly how many words there are in the Bible. First off, to do so, you'd have to look at the ancient manuscripts in the original languages, and you'd have to agree on exactly which words belonged. And when it comes to English translations, there are so many different versions, but let's say for sake of argument that in the English language there are between 800 and 900,000 words in the Bible. And if you're careful enough and try hard enough, you can find some words strung together in the Bible to, well, say just about whatever you want them to say. To understand rightly what the words of the Bible say to us, we have to read and understand them in their context. You may recall the story of the testing of Jesus in the wilderness, which occurred just after his baptism in the Jordan by John, and before he began his itinerant ministry, and before he called the disciples to come and follow him. After a period of some fasting and prayer in the wilderness, the gospel narrators tell us that Jesus engaged in a kind of a debate with the devil. And one of the things we learn in those episodes is that even the devil can quote Scripture. To understand rightly what a part of the Bible is saying, we have to understand those words in their context. The broad context of any part of the Bible we might read is the story of the saving grace of God, the story of God's wondrous creation, of humankind's fall, and of the saving, redeeming grace of God in the midst of the world. This is the broad context of any part of the Bible we might read. The Bible, of course, is also like a library made up of smaller documents, of stories and of letters and of collections. And any part of the Bible we might read ought to be understood in terms of the flow of thought of the writer or the editor of the smaller document. Rob was so gracious to offer to read for me and to all of us this morning from Paul's letter to the Christians in Rome, chapter 12. Now, the context of what we heard this morning is provided, first of all, by the saving grace of God, the God who has worked for the salvation of all humankind and to express God's own love through the story of the people of Israel and of the Messiah of Israel, Jesus of Nazareth. And the context is also provided by the flow of thought we read in that letter to the Romans as a whole. And if we were to turn just one page back to chapter 11 of that letter, we would find the Apostle Paul saying to the Gentile or to the non-Jewish Christians who made up the congregation in Rome, "You are the people of God." Now, we might think that is an unremarkable claim. What else would a New Testament writer say to the church of that day, or what else would a minister say to a congregation in our own day, but that you are the people of God? We're likely to take for granted then that Paul was a Jew, and he was deeply and firmly committed to the belief that the Jews, that the nation of Israel was God's chosen people. And yet Paul is saying to these non-Jewish Christians in Rome in a striking and remarkable way, yes, Israel is God's chosen people. And yet, because of their Messiah, Jesus, you too are God's chosen people. They remain God's chosen people. You become God's chosen people. We together are God's chosen people, because God is gracious and loving and saving. And then when we come to the words that we heard this morning, the long list of ethical instructions and encouragements, Paul was saying to the Romans, you are the people of God, so act like it. How are we as God's people to act? I think there is a tremendous confusion in our day about how it is that we as God's people are to act, particularly amongst each other and towards the world around us. I have met many Christians in my time who think it is their God-given duty to be obnoxious. There's a large church in my hometown, and the thing that I am impressed by most about the members of that congregation is their aggressive driving. You drive by that church at noon or 12:30 on a Sunday afternoon, and you're going to notice those church members tearing out of that parking lot with absolute disregard for traffic. It seems they want to demonstrate that they are so spirit-filled that they can do whatever they want on the roads. They're living so victoriously, they don't need to take account of other drivers. This is not the kind of example and a demonstration we want to make and to set for ourselves as the people of God. What exactly does Paul say to the Romans about how they are to act as God's people and therefore how we might together also act as God's people? Paul starts from the place of saying that you are to think of yourselves not as individuals, but part of a whole. You are like the different parts of a body, which have different places and abilities and roles. You are members of one another. You see, Christianity is not an individual phenomenon, but a group phenomenon. A couple of weeks ago, I was listening to the radio in the car, and I listened to the sports talk radio station most of the time, and I heard the broadcaster interviewing a pitcher who used to play for the Blue Jays. Some of you are fans and will remember the name Tom Henke. He was a relief pitcher. In fact, he was the closer who came in the ninth inning for the team when I was a boy and when the Blue Jays were at the top of the league. And it was a very interesting interview. I learned more about Tom Henke in those 5 or 10 minutes than I had ever known in my entire life. But I found one question by the interviewer to be most interesting. He said, Tom, now that you're retired and you're not a big league ball player anymore, what is it that you miss the most? And his answer was very interesting. You know, I might have thought that he would say that he misses the competition. He misses testing himself against other great athletes, but that's not what he said. I might have thought that he would say that he misses the fame and the celebrity, misses playing the game he loves in front of a stadium full of people. That's not what he said. I might have thought that he would miss most of all the big paycheck and the amazing cash flow. That's not what he said. What he said he missed most was the camaraderie, his teammates, spending time together as a team, putting his own self and his own abilities into cooperation with those of his teammates and working together towards a common cause and building bonds of friendship through those efforts. That is what he misses the most. I was surprised by that answer, but the interviewer was not. He said, every time I ask a former player what they miss the most, that's the same answer they give. Must be awfully tough to be a professional athlete. No, it's not tough to be a celebrity or to be wealthy or even to play a game. But it's tough because what you do is going to be part of such a short time in your life. Most of the rest of your life is going to have to be spent doing something else, which is not as glamorous or maybe as fun. We have the great blessing that no matter what age or stage of life we are experiencing, no matter what our wealth or our status or our abilities, we are part of a team every day. We have the chance to work together, pooling our resources and our energies and our efforts towards a common cause. And through those things to build bonds of friendship. We're part of a team. The Apostle Paul goes on to say that we have this unexpected and yet striking unity as a people of God. And yet that unity does not consist of uniformity, rather it consists of diversity. Paul went to great lengths to say that we as God's people have different perspectives and different interests and different gifts and different levels of ability. In that sense, we are quite like other types of teams that exist. If you're in a rock band, it's because you are a musician with very similar talents and interests to the other members of your band. If you play on a sports team, it's because your abilities and your interests are very similar to the other members of your team. Those sorts of teams are made up with a relative uniformity. Our team is made up of much more diversity. There's a member of our church, and with her I was having a conversation perhaps earlier in the spring, a very friendly conversation. But she said to me, William, you and I are polar opposites on every issue. But this is how it is in the people of God. Think of how limited our collective abilities would be if we all had the same perspective and could not see things from different types of viewpoints. If we all had the same interests and abilities, well, there might be one or two things that we could do really well, but we would not be very good at most things. It is by the grace of God that we have been gifted with such a diversity of viewpoints and passions and talents. It is because when our gifts are pooled together, we can do so much more and have a life that is so much richer. Perhaps like me, you have been fortunate at some point in your life to attend the symphony or the theater. And one of the things I always find most striking when I attend such a presentation is listening to the members of the orchestra warming up and preparing for the performance. On a certain level, the warm-up is an attractive kind of sound, but I think it's attractive only in the sense of anticipation it creates. In isolation, the sounds of the different musicians warming up on their different kinds of instruments wouldn't make a very attractive thing to listen to just on its own. No one listens to an orchestra warming up just for fun in their car or in their living room. It's because the instruments are very different things. And the musicians are, well, not playing together. But then inevitably the curtain rises and the musicians begin to play from the same score of music. And their different sounds begin to blend and make wonderful melody. And they can create for us as listeners some of the most marvelous experiences we will ever have. The same kind of thing when we can come together and pool our gifts and our interests and our energies into making music together. Just as an individual part of the Bible has a context, so do our lives as Christians have a context. The broader context for our lives is the saving grace of God. The Spirit of God at work in each of us and amongst us. The particular context of our lives is the specific community of people in which God has placed us for our daily work and service and growth and striving after faithfulness. Like those first century Christians in ancient Rome, the encouragement for us remains the same. We are the people of God. By the grace of God, let's act like it. Amen.